Almost dawn. Enough time for one more story. One more story before dawn to keep us warm. In a few minutes it will be the 21st of Swiftmont. 100 years ago today, on the 21st of Swiftmont, out in the waters around Crabber's Cove, a small clipper ship drew towards land. Suddenly, out of the night, the fog rolled in. For a moment, they could see nothing, not a foot in front of them. Then they saw a light. By the gods! It was the fire burning on the shore, strong enough to penetrate the swirling mist. They steered a course toward the light, but it was a campfire, much like this one. The ship crashed against the rocks, the hull sheared in two. Masts snapped like a twig. The wreckage sank with all aboard. At the bottom of the sea lay the dear Lisbeth, with her crew, their lungs filled with salt water, their eyes open, staring into the darkness. And above, as suddenly as it came, the fog lifted, receded back across the ocean, and never came again. But it is told by the fishermen and their parents and grandparents that when the fog returns to Saltmarsh, those at the bottom of the sea, out in the water by Crabber's Cove, will rise up and search for the campfire that led them to their dark, icy death. It's midnight. It's the 21st of Swiftmont. Hello and welcome to the Battling Barrow and our Halloween game. Happy Halloween. Yes, that was a creepy story at the beginning. That was the story that our players heard, some of our players heard at the end of the last session, and I relayed it again for Walker, who will be in this game, and for the beginning of this game. If you remember from last time, the Saltmarsh is having a festival of remembrance. 100 years ago on this day, the town council members clubbed together, managed to, there was a plague going on, the town was short of money for medication and care. The town members managed to club together and get a lot of money together, around 5,000 gold pieces, and saved the town. There was also around this time a captain called Drake who bought a plot of land nearby, strangely enough, for 5,000 gold. Interesting. But yes, our adventure will pick up almost where we left off last time, on the night on the beach with the aforementioned story. After hearing the old man's ghost story on the beach, Gelfenwith and Irafel head off to bed. What they failed to notice as the story's going on, there is a boat just nearby that had reached the shore, and in that, who is currently invisible, is Ranger. Walker is back. They don't notice him and he doesn't spot them, but he hears the story too. He then tries to sort of find them and get acquainted with the town. And it's at this point that my cat decided to jump on the table. I'm trying to go for a spooky Halloween atmosphere, and so our video footage has my cat in it. I apologise for that, but just roll with it. Walker goes to the nearest tavern he can find. It's the Snapping Line he goes to. He wanders up across the bridge into the Snapping Line, hoping to see if his companions are there. They are not. They are actually spending the night at Gellan Prime Waters, but he decides to bed down there and search for them in the morning. He sort of finds out a bit about town as well, asks around, and just to get his general lay of the land. That night, Walker has a sound night and doesn't notice, but the others do. They're awakened in the middle of the night, and they look out the window and they can see this fog, unnatural greenish tint to it, roll in across the water. And then there is a sound of dogs barking and glass smashing as the town seems to be affected. And as quick as all this happens, the fog recedes back into the darkness again, and they fall back to sleep. The next morning, Anirafel goes off on his own errand. Unfortunately, the player could not join us for this one, so he will be MIA in this game. But Gelfenwith heads off into town, as does Walker, and they meet up in a street and catch up with each other. I like doing this. I then had Gelfenwith go over the last session, so that means that she can have a recap herself and remember things, and also fill Walker in on the proceedings. Just then, Gellon walks up to them and spies them, gets confused because it's not an Irithol, it's a different person, but rolls with it, and he's a bit worried. They ask him what's up, and he sort of says that one of his crew members hasn't come back to shore last night. The captain of the Seagrass. He's normally quite reliable, but he didn't come back, and he's worried that he got mislaid in the unnatural fog that he saw last night. Which Walker is a bit surprised by this because he missed it all. But the players agree to help. Gellon says that he has 2 leads for them to follow. They can go the other day. The captain of the Seagrass and his crew had an altercation with a dwarf miner in the Wicker Goat, or he sometimes frequents the Snapping Line pub, and they can go there to see if anyone knows what's up. Players decide to go to the Wicker Goat. They enter the Wicker Goat, and even though it's morning, it is the day of the festival that is happening, the Festival of Remembrance, and so the tavern is quite busy. The town has a bit of a issue though, as the Traladarians want to celebrate the town of the Festival of Remembrance, but the miners and the Black Eagle Barony Guard don't. They want to keep the money for the new mine that has been opened and use it to invest in that. So there's a bit of conflict here, but for the most part people are feeling somewhat merry. So they enter the tavern looking for the dwarf in question. Gellon says you can't miss him. He has a scar across his face and an eye missing. As it's quite busy, they don't find him, so they ask the landlord, who points out to a darkened corner where the dwarf is. They politely go and ask him, actually. I thought they might use intimidation, but no, they politely go and sort of appeal to his good side, and so it's all quite nice, actually. I was expecting it to go a different way, but it's quite nice. He sort of says yes, he did have a altercation with the captain in question. They had a bit of a scrap, nothing too serious, no blood drawn, and they went about their separate ways. He doesn't know where he is, other than that the captain was talking about doing some fishing over towards Crabber's Cove, which players know where that is, because on the last game that was one of the things they sort of asked about, strangely, almost foreshadowing this. So with that, the players decide to, maybe they got lost around that area, so they go down to back to the docks, into their ship, and set sail to Crabber's Cove. And it's not too long before they actually find the seagrass afloat around Crabber's Cove. They pull up alongside and climb on board, and the first thing they notice is that the deck is unnaturally wet and seems to be covered in seaweed and barnacles. There's no one, as they're climbing on board, don't see anyone visible on deck, but as soon as they get on board they notice the dead bodies everywhere. It looks like the entire crew has been killed. They begin to examine the bodies, and after passing a medicine check, they sort of come to the conclusion that these bodies don't look like they've been dead just for a day. They look like they've been underwater for a good long while, possibly even months. There's sort of water in their lungs that they sort of bring up, and they look around and they see that they've been horribly slashed to pieces as well, various weapons, and one still has a weapon still embedded inside it. It's like a boat hook that they remove and look at, and it says "Dear Lisbeth" upon it. This instantly springs a memory from the last game where they went to the snapping line and remember seeing wreckage from the Dear Lisbeth. Also, another thing that is strange is there is gold coins scattered around the bodies as well, covered in muck. They examine one of them, and it's a really old Tralidarian coin from about 100 years ago. It's then they notice the captain's corpse nearby, Captain Bannon, and he's wearing a loose cloak. He's wrapped in a loose cloak, but there's the catch upon the cloak is missing. And the captain's hand is wrapped tight around something which they managed to pry open, and it's a golden brooch with a symbol of a ship and scales. And as they're examining it, Ranger realises this is an old Tralidarian noble family belonging to the Drakes that are thought to have died out around 100 years ago during the plague that affected the town. As he examines it, the brooch corrodes in an instant. It was at that point when one of the corpses sits up and croaks, "Blood for blood, all will pay the price." And as he does that, 6 others sit up as well, and we have a little combat here. These are tougher than zombies. These are effectively what the fog does is reanimate the dead, and that's what these are. So they're expecting zombies, and the combat went quite, there was spell usage, and this all happens over the one day, so there's no rest in this game, in this session. There's no resting up. So wounds were taken. Wolfie took quite a big bashing actually by these fog zombies, as did Galfenwith, but they do overcome them in the end and return to town and tell Gellan they tow the boat, bring it into port, and they're going to let Gellan know, and he can deal with the authorities. As they walk in the streets, they overhear a group of people talking about how Brother Brianhand was seemingly drunk earlier on today, most unlike him, and they sort of blame it on the stress of the festival, because he's meant to be doing a sermon tonight for the reveal of the council members that 100 years ago saved the town from a plague. There is a statue being revealed for them. I believe they are known as the I forget what I refer to them as now, but we'll refer to them as the saviours of the town. If I need to refer back to them, it's not important too much really. But yes, they're saying he seemed drunk. They say he was staggering around the shrine, blathering about blood and revenge, and he seemed drunk, and the town guard had to take him back to the temple. So now we have a mystery upon our hands, and the players have some options. They can actually go to see Brother Brianhand and see what that was about, or they can do some research into various things, and the first port of call in this research, of course, is the snapping line. So that is where we go to. We go to the snapping line, and we begin to go to where the wreckage of the Dear Elizabeth is, and we begin to search around it. And it's there, in a hidden compartment. They find a contract. It's a strange contract. About 100 years ago, it's between Drake and some members of the town council, where Drake buys a large plot of land to the north of the town to form a colony for survivors of the plague, and he pays 5,000 gold for this. It includes pretty standard oath language for the region about 100 years ago, including the line, "We swear this by our blood for 100 years." And the council members signed it are some of the family members that are still prominent in town today, such as Owland, Primewater, and Brother Merlon, the priest of the temple, who was priest of the temple 100 years ago. And so after that, they decide now to head to the temple to speak to Brother Brinehand. As they enter, they see him speaking to a town messenger, asking if the cleric is prepared for the statue dedication. This seems to enrage Brother Brinehand, and he throws an empty wine bottle at the messenger, screaming, "This celebration is a travesty! We're celebrating murderers! Murderers!" At which point he slumps back into his chair by his desk. The messenger, who has long hair and a sort of big late 70s, early 80s handlebar moustache. If you've seen the film The Fog, this is actually me referencing John Carpenter himself, rushes out of the building, leaving the players alone with the Brother Brinehand. They talk to him. There is a bit of roleplay back and forth, and they get him to talk. He sort of says last night he was doing his work on his dedication and he brushed against that spot on the wall, and the stones over there, and he sort of points to this hole in the wall, just fell away. This journal was inside, and he hands them a old book. Brother Merlon was my teacher, my mentor. He inspired me to follow this path. And this is the journal page in question. 9th of Frymont, met with Drake for the first time this evening. He stood in the shadows to prevent us from getting a clear look at him. What a vile thing this disease is. Drake is a rich man with a cursed condition. His proposal is simple. He wishes to purchase a plot of land north of Saltmarsh for a colony. I must balance my feelings of mercy and compassion for the poor man with my revulsion at a settlement of the disease so close to ours. 20 of Swiftmont. Cannot sleep. My mind still reels with the truth of the abomination that myself and my conspirators plan. The 6 of us met from dusk until midnight. We planned the death of Drake and his comrades. I tell myself that Saltmarsh needs that gold to repair the fishing fleet and feed the people, but it does not soothe the horror I feel at being an accomplice to murder. 21st of Swiftmont. The deed is done. Drake followed our false fire to shore, and the ship broke apart on the rocks by Crabber's Cove. We were aided by an unearthly fog that rolled in as if heaven sent, though Halav have no part in our actions. May the gods forgive us. We all claim to be doing his bloody act for the good of our town and families, but that did not stop us from taking some of Drake's treasure for ourselves. I am no better than this, for I claimed my share for the good of the temple. 30th Swiftmont. Dusk until midnight belongs to the dead. Gods deliver us. He tries to then convince the party they must go back into town and cancel this ceremony. It's got to be cancelled. And he then begins to just sob, and that is all they're going to get out of him. As they leave the temple, they make a sort of little perception look around, and they notice there's these really ornate candlesticks, sort of better than anything else in this temple. And on closer inspection, it has the same ship and scales motif that the brooch from earlier had. They ask the brother if they can take them. This might help things out, and he agrees when they explain that they think this is part of Drake's treasure and they want to make amends. They don't even know that there is undead come. I guess they want to if they've seen the fog, but they don't know there's what's going to happen next. But they feel that they need to make this right. This is part of this gold that was stolen, and the brother agrees, wanting nothing to do with it, having stolen blood gold really in his temple. So they head back to town, and the festival now is in full swing. There is merriment. People are going on. The dedication for the ceremony ends shortly after sunset, and there is a feast in the council building. The townspeople are all in the streets, having drinks and food and what have you, and celebrations going on in their own homes. It's a big deal. The players obviously are too late to stop the celebration. By this point, it's happened. But it's then, as they're sort of down by the beach, or working their way towards the beach where their ship is, they notice a green unnatural fog rolling in. It drifts in from Crabber's Cove and then surrounds the beach there to the empty net, and then the green market, pretty much where they are. It then moves up the hills of town, and they then begin to hear the screaming begins. They quickly decide they need to investigate and help out and see what's going on. And as they're trying to make their way through, it's quite chaotic at the moment. People are rushing one way and rushing this way, and they sort of see ghostly figures in the fog. People are sort of saying how these things are killing the town, and so the players quickly decide they must get the people all into one place of safety. They think that the temple is the place for this, and so they head off, or get the players to head off to the temple. Here they utilise Newt. He casts his dancing light, and between Newt and these lights he guides the townfolk around him towards the temple. But there are some stragglers behind that they need to sort of try and help out. During this, a woman called Madame Barbary rushes up, sort of going against the crowd. The crowd are rushing towards the temple. She's going against them, working their way to the players, and she's screaming for help. Her son is home alone. Her son Thomas is still there. The neighbour was sort of watching him, babysitting him while she is at the festivities. The players ask the players if they can help. They say yes, where is he? And she points sort of towards a big patch of fog that is surrounding a building. They convince her to go with the other townsfolk to the safety of the temple, and they will rescue the son. So we enter the house, and downstairs they quickly discover the dead body of the person that was probably babysitting Thomas. And from upstairs they hear a child scream. They rush upstairs and see Thomas being sort of pursued by 3 fog spirits. There is a bit of a combat here, and it doesn't go well. Again, these are tough beings, and it's cramped, confined spaces. This is a deadly combat. What happens here is we lose Wolfie due to wounds sustained earlier on the seagrass, and now wounds here. These are fairly hard hitting. They do 2 attacks, and Wolfie dies. Also during this combat, Galfenwith, who even though it's not her wolf, was really upset by the fact that Wolfie died, because it was like a character in his own right. But she gets down to death saves as well. She gets taken down. This is becoming a true horror game, but luckily it sort of works out okay. Ranger manages to deal with the last remaining fog spirits and uses his healing ability to revive her a bit. So now they know the fog proves a deadly challenge. They leave the house and convince the boy to come with them, and they make their way back to the temple. But on the way they pass the Snapping Line Tavern, and they hear sounds coming from inside, and they think the people should be evacuating. So they work their way in there, and what they see is at the back part of the tavern are some locals that are wanting to get out. They can see they're wanting to get out, but in front of them are 6 sort of rough looking guys that are drunk, slightly belligerent, and sort of saying it's all fake news. They should stay and just have another drink. So just to reiterate what I'm doing here, there needs to be 5 successes, and a success can be anything like passing a DC check or a successful round of combat, like as in you've dealt damage. Whether you get damage dealt on you subsequently doesn't matter. If you miss the attack roll, that would count as a failure. So you need 5 successes to move on from these little challenges, and there is a time limit. The fog is drawing near, and at the end of 7 turns the fog will appear. 8 turns the fog will appear, and the fog spirits will enter, and if you get 3 fouls total, it happens quicker. So that was the point in these challenges, and the previous one with rescuing Tom. So they at first use tact, shall we say, to try and persuade or intimidate them. That doesn't go as planned, so that's a foul, and the fog moves nearer to the tavern. It's now putting a bit of time limit and pressure on them, so they just use a bit of combat and end up gently persuading them using a bit of combat. Effectively, Witchy Poo lights some on fire. They run out of the building on fire to douse themselves. The other 3 that are left back down, having seen their friends burnt, allowing the party to rescue the remaining patrons of the inn, and we move on. They're trying to avoid the fog patches as much as possible, using stealth and navigation to avoid it, because they don't want to have an encounter with it, because if they do, it could prove totally deadly for them. They're now out of potions, and I think Ranger has one more healing ability slot thing left, whatever you have in 5e. So yeah, this is now survival horror. Unfortunately, what happens is they come to a bit of a alley where there's a big crowd, and they sort of push their way through, and there is a cart that's been somehow stuck in the mud, in the chaos and confusion that is blocking the path. And so they begin to move it, and behind them they can see the fog creeping in. They're trying to move it, and it's just not budging. And you look behind, and now they can make out the shape of fog spirits now quite clearly. It's this really tense moment. What is actually happening here in game turns is they're making challenge rolls, and they need a certain amount of successes for the cart to get moved. And so it's a case of each roll and each foul, they're feeling the foul as that fog moves closer. Even with when they get success, it's moving closer towards them, but each foul, and so it's a really tense moment. Luckily they get it moved just at the right time as the fog spirits descend upon them, so they manage to avoid that encounter or combat, because they do not want it. After much avoiding and stealthing, they make it back to the temple, where they barricade themselves in. All the town council members are there, and a lot of people are there in safety. Other people, they find out, have managed to barricade themselves up in other sort of key locations around town. But now they need to discuss breaking the curse. As they're looking out sort of windows, they can see the fog is making its way towards them. Now there is many different ways they can do this. It's quite open-ended. It depends on which way what the party comes up with, and they decide to come up with the gold. They've got the gold candlesticks, and they look around and can see some of the council members are having family heirlooms of this brooch, similar brooch that they found earlier with the ship and scowls upon it, and so they gather them up, and then they hear the banging upon the door. The barricade and the door bursts open, and in the fog drifts with lots of fog spirits, and at the front is the spirit of Drake himself. There's a tense moment as they pile up the missing gold and pile it up in front of him, and it's just the spirit standing there silently. Look at him, and no one moves. And with that, the spirits pick up the gold and leave the temple, and the fog resides. There is an audible sigh of relief, and that happened. Geralt from Web had, like, by this time, 3 hit points, I think. Wolfie is dead. Ranger himself had taken a good battering. They weren't ready for that combat with all those fog spirits. And the town people thank them for dealing with this. And with that is where our session ended. We didn't even plan for next week's game. So I hope you enjoyed this retelling of the fog via D&D. I probably could have relayed this story better, but it's my style of waffle. But yeah, until the next game, guys, stay safe, have a happy Halloween, see you in the next video.